23 years ago today, on July 7th, 1996, marked one of the biggest industry-changing nights in the history of the wrestling business. This, of course, was the night that the NWO officially formed. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash had recently come over to WCW. They were booked in a six-man match against Luger, Sting, and Macho at the Bash, and they were going to have a third man with them to go up against the three WCW guys. And I cannot believe that they swerved us with Hogan. Here we thought it was going to be Mabel. You know, we all thought it was going to be Mabel. And they throw us a curveball and give us Hogan. I think Mabel would have been better, but whatever. I'm kidding, of course. I always love talking about these times because I was at such the perfect age for this. I was 20 years old in 1996, and I have fond memories of this time and all of these years in the 90s. And I vividly remember the end of Kevin Nash and Scott Hall's run in WWE and their appearance on Nitro. I watched all of that shit live as it happened. I was a dual VCR guy. I had two VCRs hooked up to my TV at all times. I recorded Monday Night Raw every week, and I would always catch the Nitro replay on TNT because they would always replay the show. So I was balls deep in everything, man, and I just loved these times. And when Scott Hall and Kevin Nash left the WWE, and you could see that coming, you knew they were heading off to WCW. By then, you know, the magazines and the dirt sheets and shit like that were picking up on it. You knew pretty much early in 1996 that they were both gone. They were both doing some jobs out the door, and Hall really wasn't around at all. He was even bumped from WrestleMania 12. So the writing was on the wall there. You knew they were on their way out. And I even remember I used to, you know, purchase all of the Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazines, and I'd go to the newsstands. I lived in an apartment complex that was right in the middle of like downtown near the college area. So I was in walking distance to everything. And there was this awesome newsstand that had just every magazine imaginable. And they had a wide array of wrestling magazines. And I would always go down there, you know, walk down there like once a month and buy a shit ton of them. And I remember picking up a lot of magazines around 96. I still have them all. And some of the headlines on the magazines would say, like, things that Kevin Nash needs to do, things that Diesel needs to do when he gets to WCW. You know, the number one thing was beat the Giant. If he wants to be known as a true world champion and the best big man in the business, he needs to go after the Giant first. Nobody had any idea what WCW was going to do with them. We were all assuming that they were going to go over there with different gimmicks because WWE owned the gimmick, and they were just going to be incorporated into the roster in the same stupid, goofy-ass storylines that they were doing, like the Dungeon of Doom and Elizabeth's high heel shoe and so much Hogan and Macho Man, and all that shit was just still going on. So when Hall and Nash were heading over there, you know, I didn't know what to expect, and I wasn't really looking forward to it because I knew that they were not going to be as good as Razor and Diesel was in the WWE. And I would turn out to be right, but just kind of wrong at the same time. Yes, they would not be as good as Razor and Diesel in WWE. They would be better. The Outsiders came in, and that was a brilliant move by WCW, like it or not. And Vince definitely did not. He tried to sue him, and I think he failed because he knew it was good. And WCW, they didn't have to do a whole lot. They didn't have to call him Razor Ramon or Diesel. All they had to do was have him come out there. These are the two of the biggest stars currently in WWE. Not guys like Hogan or Savage who are only in the ring sometimes or not really around very much or maybe gone from the WWE for a year before turning up in WCW. These guys were fresh off the top of the WWE's card and right there on Nitro. So of course it's going to look like they're jumping ship or they're coming in to invade. And that's all Scott Hall had to do. He said, you want a war? You got one. And right there, that was him saying, hey, we are here. We're the guys that did the Billionaire Ted skits about you. You know, we don't like you talking shit. Now we're here to, to create this war. It was fucking brilliant. And man, it was crazy because as a wrestling fan, I had not seen anything like this. And it was crazy, man. And I hated to admit that I liked it because it was so intriguing. It was so compelling. But I was very much a WWE fangirl. You know, in this war, I had the WWE's back. I didn't like WCW. I didn't like Eric Bischoff. I didn't like what they were doing. They were driving me crazy. As a wrestling fan, I was insulted by their shitty-ass product. You know, but when Hall and Nash got there, I was like, oh, God, they got something, and I hate to admit it. And they became cool. I broke down and bought an NWO t-shirt. The fucking thing took like 6 weeks to get to me. I hand wrote a personal check, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, mailed it, and waited a month and a half for that shirt to turn up. That's how long it took. It's not like a click of a button on your iPhone, and 2 days later that shit's at your front door. So different back then, but it was good, man. It was so good. And Nitro, I just have so many fond memories of Hall and Nash coming into the company, forming the NWO. And I've told the story before. I was living in an apartment, and it was one of my first apartments. And I was very young, and of course, just working a part-time job at the restaurant and even trying to do a little bit of school. So it's not like I had some luxurious place. And my roommate and I did not have air conditioning in our apartment. But there was a window unit in the living room, and I had a female roommate, and her fiance took off for like a European trip. She went out of town for like 2 months. So I had the entire place to myself, and I basically pulled my bed mattress out in the middle of the living room so I could sit out there in the summer in North Carolina in July and have the AC running, and I would watch WWE and WCW right there on my floor bed in the middle of the living room. And that was all during these NWO times. I have very vivid memories of how I felt, what I was wearing, the way it smelled in the room, everything. It just brings back so much during these times. So when I glanced at the calendar and noticed that it was July 7th and realized that was the birth of the NWO, I thought this would be a perfect This Day in History to do, because I've never really done a video or any sort of isolated commentary on this match ever. So what better time than now? But leading into the Bash at the Beach, of course, they had a full pay-per-view before then. I think it was it Great American Bash? And that's when Hall and Nash power-bombed Bischoff through the table or through the stage. And I think that was also when they were getting the pressure put on them legally, because that was when they interviewed, or when Bischoff interviewed Hall and Nash and asked them right on WCW pay-per-view if they worked for the WWF. And they both said no out loud. But you still had Scott Hall out there doing the Razor Ramon accent. He had the hair, the toothpick, the mannerisms. They didn't have the wrestling gear, but they were definitely trying to portray themselves as Razor and Diesel. But WCW, I mean, they were doing all right. All they were doing was putting these guys out there. I was actually on WCW's side in that lawsuit because, yeah, it sucks. I'm sure it made Vince McMahon's blood boil, and it really pissed a lot of people off in WWE. But what did you expect them to do? It's not like they were out there in their Razor and Diesel gimmicks. They were just so well known as those guys. It was hard to view them as anything else. So it didn't really matter if they were using the names or not. It was still just eerie and so surreal to see them in a WCW environment. Leading up to the Bash, they were on TV. First, it was Scott Hall cutting the promo, coming out there and interacting with Sting and guys like that. A couple of weeks later, Kevin, big sexy, look at the adjective Nash, shows up and confronts Eric Bischoff, and that was crazy. And just seeing these WWE guys there was nuts, and I couldn't wait to tune into the next week just to see Hall and Nash. They were the only ones I wanted to see. I didn't give a shit about the rest of WCW's roster. I wanted to see more of Scott Hall and Kevin Nash on Nitro, because to me, to my WWE brain, that was freaky to see, and it took a while to get used to. It took a while to get used to a lot of guys that were jumping ship back then. And right around 96, too, the rosters almost did a swap. I alwaust loved that time period in 1996, because when you look at who was on top in WWE, you had guys like Vader, Mankind, Farouk, Goldust, all of those guys. Mark Marrow was another one. All of those guys were on top in WWE, were in WCW about 2 years prior to that. And then you look over at WCW, and you got Hogan, Hall, Nash, Savage, Earthquake, Boss Man, DiBiase, guys like that 2 years prior. They were all in WWE. So they really did kind of like a switch. Pillman is another guy, and Austin, that jumped over to WWE that were previously in WCW 2 years before. So the rosters really did swap there. Triple H is another guy that comes to mind. And it was pretty kind of crazy to see, WWE make use of what was lesser talent. WCW definitely had the bigger names, but WWE did more with the talent that they had, and they created a ton of future stars. So it was an interesting time, to say the least. And then we roll in to the actual Bash at the Beach pay-per-view. We still don't know who the third man is going to be. Hall and Nash are saying that they're going to reveal that to everybody at the Bash. And we were all thinking that would happen before, because it's a 6-man match. Hall and Nash essentially worked this whole thing as a handicap match just so they could surprise us with the big third man reveal at the end. And of course, Hall and Nash have got Sting and Luger and Savage on the ropes, and out comes Hulk Hogan. Crowd starts going nuts. Hogan is power walking to the ring. And I got to tell you, Hogan really wasn't on my radar of guys to turn heel. I was really thinking it was going to be a WWE guy. Now, I joked about Mabel in the beginning, but I really didn't think it was going to be Mabel. I thought it might be the 1-2-3 Kid, or I thought it might be somebody else. I wasn't quite understanding that it had to be somebody big. And the Clique now, or Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, both go on to tell stories years later that the whole plan was to do somebody major, and it had to be one of two guys. It had to either be Sting turning on WCW and joining them, or it had to be Hogan. So I think Sting was the first idea. He maybe balked at it. And then Hogan, saw the potential dollar signs there and how much money they could draw if he was a heel. And much to Hogan's credit, he didn't worry, too much about his character. It seems like it took a lot to get guys like Bret Hart and Sting to turn heel. They were very concerned about like their characters and shit like that. Hogan seemed concerned about the money. And he saw, a big money train coming by. He's like, I'll do whatever it takes to get on that. So I almost in a weird way respect Hogan for that. And he took the plunge. And I think Hulk Hogan made an equally as good of a heel as he did a babyface. I mean, he was so easy to hate. What a douchebag. When he turned like that and the fans are throwing shit in the ring, that is a surreal moment. And Mean Gene Okerlund doing the interview was perfect. He was the perfect guy to do that because those guys were bros. They came through the business together in the AWA and the WWF. Gene getting in the ring with a guy that just turned heel and giving Hogan shit, yelling at him. And the fans are just littering the ring with trash and drink cups. It amazes me nobody got hurt. Hall and Nash are slapping them down. It was great. I mean, what a scene. You could never get away with that now. It would be a damn near riot. A fucking riot squad would come in there and pepper spray everybody. But back then, it was like, it felt very real. It was a very tense environment. Even that fan tried to get in the ring, and Scott Hall just stomped him right into the mat. Could have seriously injured the guy, and Hall just put the boots to him. I mean, it was a dangerous, tense, aggressive environment with the fans and with Hogan. They all played it up so well, and I will never forget that shit, man. It's one of the few bright spots in WCW. It's one of the few things that they did absolutely right, and it changed everything. The business changed that night. That was it. Technically that came after Austin's 316 promo, just a couple of weeks after, if you can imagine that. Those two major monumental moments took place days apart. And it turned out to be, a beautiful time in wrestling. The Monday Night Wars, a lot of that was kicked off with the NWO. And that's all it took, man. Once Hogan turned heel and you had the three of those guys together and they were tearing apart WCW, and you had damn near fan riots every single week on Nitro, and somebody else would join the NWO and they would beat the shit out of baby faces and spray paint everybody. And then Hogan would win the title at Road Wild from the Giant, and it would get even more crazier. WWE just couldn't keep up. They were getting their asses kicked in the ratings from that shit. It was a beautiful time, man. And even though I was not a big fan of WCW and I was firmly on the side of WWE, I could not deny how great that television was during those days of the NWO. So, if you have any memories of the NWO, their formation, and what they did during that first year or two of their existence before it all went downhill and down the shitter, feel free to share those memories in the comments below. And thank you very much for joining me on another trip down memory lane on this day in history. Y'all be good. I'll talk to you soon. Peace.